impact that physical activity has on your body, and that I kind of go back to that sort of famous dictum by Hippocrates about let food be thy medicine. And I would say, and then this going back, is that I think there are many reasons why food can't be your medicine. And one reason is, of course, if you know anything about digestion, you know that food comes in and it's broken down into different nutrients and vitamins and minerals, and those cross over into our bloodstream, and then they kind of wash into our cells or are taken into our cells at a certain amount. But that's it. They're not doing anything beyond that. So what happens on the other hand with exercise is that it creates these new molecules. It opens up new pathways, and it turns out that those are some of the very similar to the same things that are created by pharmaceutical companies when they're doing things like trying to reduce pain, trying to relieve stress, and trying to reduce inflammation.
Love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted.
So with us today is Anastacia Marx de Salcedo, and she is a nonfiction writer. And she actually wrote 2 very interesting books, Eat Like a Pig, Run Like a Horse, and Combat Through the Kitchen, How the US Military Shapes the Way You Eat. That published also in Spanish, Japanese, and Chinese. Besides that, her essays and articles appeared in many different magazines, Atlantic, Salon, Vice, and also in PBS and NPR blogs. She worked in a bunch of different places, also in public health as a consultant, news magazine, publisher, and a public policy researcher. She was born in New York, graduated from Columbia University, and lives in Boston. I'm not sure if currently, but that's what the bio said. But she also traveled a bunch in her life, and in her role, she is a very incredible woman. Hello, Anastacia. Very nice to have you here.
Hi, Marta and Pedro. Very good to be here as well.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Well, first of all, I would like to say that I enjoyed a lot reading your book. I mean, I found it quite, entertaining. And to me, I'm an engineer. I have a mind of an engineer, when it comes to talking about health, nutrition, I mean, I always find it's quite frustrating because, normally there are different conflicting theories. And when I saw the cover and title of your book, I found it quite appealing because, the title is Run Like a Horse. Eat Like a Pig, Run Like a Horse. We will give a link in the episode description. I think the correlation between sports and the health is often overlooked. I think, is it fair to say that the main thesis of your book revolves around the idea that exercising has a way bigger impact on health than dieting does?
That is absolutely the idea. I'm not saying that diet and nutrition aren't important, but I'm saying that once you meet the baseline for what your nutritional needs, there's really no benefit to be gained by following any particular special diet. But the real benefits to be gained are in doing regular, especially aerobic exercise, and that has a really powerful impact on your health at the cellular level, which then creates overall health.
Yeah, I kind of agree, and then we'll talk later about that because I kind of related to the things that you talk about in your book. I mean, at a different level from you, but especially the factors of exercising in your overall health, So, but one of the things that I wanted to tell you about is I found it funny how you put animals in your book as main characters. Is it like a wink or a criticism to the anthropocentric way of dealing with any subject from humans?
Yes, that was the idea. really the issue of diet, obesity, and lifestyle illnesses has been looked at millions of times from an anthropocentric viewpoint. And I said, well, maybe there's nothing, maybe in order to gain some new insight, we should kind of expand that to the fellow creatures, especially the ones close to us on the tree of life. And so that is what I did. I tried to look at the issue of movement from many different creatures in the book. And really, actually, that's one of the most important things that I learned in doing the research, which was that most animals are in motion for much of their waking lives. They are moving around, and not only a small amount of motion, but rather a lot of motion. Like, for example, mice, that I have a chapter about mice, and mice will physically run. Little tiny mouse will run anywhere between depending on the research, 4 and 8 miles a day.
Jesus, for such a tiny thing, right?
Yeah, and so really it became clear, and I talked to some scientists who really stated this, that physical activity, it's not an option. It's really built into our bodies, and if we're not being physically active, we cannot maximize our health.
It makes a lot of sense indeed.
Yeah. I need to say that the title of your book is very spot on. It's super creative, and also considering the fact that you also involved animals in writing your book, I think it's perfect title. But we are curious, like, what inspired you to write a book, and also what inspired you to title it like that?
Well, those are two different questions. So maybe the title is the shorter answer, and then maybe we can talk about what inspired me. So the title, I can't resist a catchy title, number one. And so Eat Like a Pig, Run Like a Horse. It was very catchy and also encapsulated my message, although I would add some more words in. The real message is, if you eat like a pig, you better run like a horse. So that was one reason. The next reason was actually because of this animal theme that was in the book. And so it turns out that we are very close to both pigs and horses. Pigs in our diet and in the way we digest and metabolize food, and even the way molecules circulate in our blood. And to horses, in that we are both actually the champion long distance runners of the animal kingdom, because we are we sweat and therefore can cool down better than most other animals. So that's the secondary message. And then there's actually a little third one, which is just because of the extremeness. I believe in going all in. So, eat like a pig, run like a horse, do it to the max. Yeah, so those are the 3 reasons for the title. And then as to inspiration, that's a personal story, which is when I was in my 20s, I had the first episode of what it was like having a stroke. One side of my body went numb, I lost strength, the muscles became very weak and shaky, and then at that time, it was right before the MRI became, very prevalent. And so I went to a neurologist, and the neurologist looked at me gloomily and said, okay, well, maybe it was an anomaly. Maybe it just will never happen again, some weird thing, maybe of a tumor, in which case you're going to be back and things are going to be, the prognosis is gloomy, or maybe you have multiple sclerosis. And so that was not, when you're in your mid-20s, not the sort of thing you like to hear. And I kind of went off on a journey and I think I ended up in Latin America and sort of running away and trying to, again, live life to the maximum in that moment. But eventually then I had a couple more MS attacks. The second one was also similar to a stroke, and then a couple more where I would lose some some strength and feeling in my legs. And then eventually, several years later, when I was actually pregnant with my second daughter, I I had always swum, but I strained my shoulder, projectile vomiting, when I was sick with morning sickness, and so I said, "Oh, what can I do? Maybe I'll try doing a very gentle jog." And so I guess about 3 months pregnant, and so I started doing this little gentle jog, and I kept it up after she was born, and throughout the years since then. And after a while, I noticed I had no more MS attacks.
Interesting.
So I said, okay. And at first, again, I was like, okay, I don't know what's happening. I'm just going to keep doing it. And eventually I said, what's going on? Why is it something to do with my exercise that I haven't had any progression? I've had some internal progression because they can see new lesions on my brain, but I have no outward symptoms of MS. And so that was the inspiration for the journey into what is it about exercise that is so incredibly protective against inflammatory disease processes.
As I said before, I related to a certain extent with you because obviously in another level, which doesn't apply to this subject, but I also kind of had some problems, and the only way I could find release was with a sport, exercising very, very strongly. So I mean, like, did you? When was the time when did you realize that it was really working for you in big time? Like you were telling about it before, but when was the time that you said
that the exercise was well, I mean, actually my neurologist had suggested it because after one of the less severe attacks, but the ones that affected my legs, I had gone to see him, and he, did the usual thing, the MRI, blah, blah, blah. And then at that point, there was this, the treatment that is now quite common, interferon-based treatment. And he said, well, there's this treatment. And I said, I really don't want to do that because the downside just seems so severe. And it seems to be that I'm doing okay. And I said, well, really, can you tell me, can I go back to exercise? And he laughed and he said, oh yeah. And actually they're coming out with some new research that's showing that, regular aerobic exercise may be as protective as this sort of therapy. So that was sort of the first intimation that I had, but it hasn't been fully explored. It tends to be more like if you want to alleviate a little some of your MS symptoms and may not feel discomfort and spasticity, but there hasn't been a huge body of research still on if it's protective or not. But there seems to be, I think it falls into the greater category of being an anti-inflammatory measure, and that, so those and we can talk about it in a little bit, but when you exercise, your cells create these molecules to deal with the stress of exercise, particularly heat and some other messenger molecules, and those end up circulating then after your bout of exercise in your body, and they also will address other types of inflammation, not only exercise related.
If you don't mind me asking, what is it like to have MS, and how do you react when people, because I imagine the most common reaction is like try to sympathize with you, but I looking at you, I mean, you look such an energetic woman. I kind of think you don't like that kind of approach from people, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, that's hard. It's a funny thing when you have one of those sort of like what I would call a name brand illness like that, and people have this idea that, one, you're doing badly, two, that they should ask about how you're doing. And I really did not like that, because I felt that I think it has that feeling of being labeled. You go into something and people and it's kind of unfortunate, because I kept my diagnosis pretty much secret unless the people were in my family and a couple close friends. And now, since I have been talking about it more, every now and then someone has said something to me that's made me realize, oh, they think of me as a person with a disease first, and I don't like that feeling.
Yeah.
I want to be a person first, and that's just one of my the many little flavors that go together to make me.
Okay, thanks for answering.
Of course. Yeah, I think we definitely understand. And as Pedro said, like you have so much positive energy about you, and there's so many other things about you than just this, that yeah, people shouldn't be labeled like that. I'm also wondering, when you were doing research for your book, was there anything in particular that very like surprised you? Or do you think, or were there a lot of things like this that you found like, oh, I didn't know this, or like, oh, this is groundbreaking?
Yeah, well, I mean, I truly learned about how exercise affects us at the cellular and molecular level in doing the book. So in that sense, the science that I learned was a surprise. And I think I was, if anything, surprised by how robust it was and how powerful. At the same time as I was writing my book, and it still hasn't been completed, the National Institutes of Health here in the United States started a very big project called the Molecular Transducers of Physical Activity in Humans. Mm-hmm. And what that project was doing for the very first time, and I'm going to put a little side note, I want to talk about the difference between focus and research on exercise versus nutrition and diet. For the very first time, scientists decided they would try to categorize all the different molecules that are created by exercise and that communicate in our body and stimulate different processes. And so this is a huge project. It was supposed to take 5 years. There are many different institutions participating. They're doing all sorts of different types of research, from laboratory to doing trials with animals, and also collecting human samples. And the goal is to just create this entire inventory of every substance that gets created by physical activity, and then to try and understand what it does. So this kind of maps back perfectly to my project. They have not finished their work yet, but I did talk to them after they had concluded many of the animal clinical trials, and they had already found some really fascinating things, like exercise affects males and females differently. They found that exercise affects every single system in the body, from what you would expect from your brain and your blood and circulatory system, to your gut health and your reproductive health. And so all of this together just has really deepened my my sense of awe at the impact that physical activity has on your body, and that it's I kind of go back to that sort of famous dictum by Hippocrates about let food be thy medicine. And I would say, and then this going back, is that I think there are many reasons why food can't be your medicine. And one reason is, of course, if you know anything about digestion, you know that food comes in and it's broken down into different nutrients and vitamins and minerals, and those cross over into our bloodstream, and then they kind of wash into our cells or take into our cells at a certain amount. But that's it. They're not doing anything beyond that. So what happens on the other hand with exercise is that it creates these new molecules. It opens up new pathways, and it turns out that those are some of the very similar to the same things that are created by pharmaceutical companies when they're doing things like trying to reduce pain, trying to relieve stress, and trying to reduce inflammation. So really that needs to be changed, and exercise is really the medicine that we that we all have accessible for us.
Yeah, I think Marta and I totally agree because lately we've been practicing CrossFit, and we kind of have a smile after every workout, no matter how hard it is. But is there, from the information that you manage, is there any kind of sports that is most effective than others? Because I imagine like jogging is not that effective as doing CrossFit, for instance.
Well, I think the real goal is the elevation of heart rate. Because that is an indication that this process is happening, because the reason your heart rate goes up is so that you can get more oxygen to your cells, which means that there's this greatly increased metabolism, which is then going to, create a very high demand for your mitochondria, which then ends up producing all this set of wonderful effects, including these medical molecules that will then circulate. But yes, you do need, I think you need to get your heart rate up for probably at least 15 minutes a day. I do like to run, so easy, throw on the shoes. And I think the endorphins are great, but I used to swim. I think you could, as long as you're getting your heart rate up, then you should have those effects.
How much do you run in a week, more or less?
It depends. Right now I'm working on a really intense public health project. So I'm going, which is kind of my minimum, but I'll do 3 to 4 miles a day. But you don't need to do that much. I do that a little more because more of the, I like the other effects. I like, being slimmer. I like, it's vanity. It makes me feel in a really good mood. I think probably a couple miles is all you would really need to do.
And do you really feel like when you start being more sedentary, when you stop your exercising routine, do you feel your symptoms to increase?
Yes, I do. And in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that. That was one of the signs to me that there must be something about the exercise, which was if I had a couple days when I didn't go running, I would notice that I get paresthesia, which is this kind of weird tingly feeling that you get. I took that as a sign that there's something happening on a daily basis, which is in fact is true, as we talked about. So, I'm getting my little daily dose of anti-inflammatory molecules, and that's probably keeping my MS progression very stable.
Yeah. No, I think, as Pedro said as well, like I realized that when I stopped exercising, because I was just too busy, like just work purely, I got all my injuries back because I was just standing and sitting for way too long, and I would be so much more anxious. And then I needed just to go back on a loop and do some exercise, and I felt totally better, and everything went back to balance, which was insane. But it's also funny that when you're busy, one of the things you cut off is time outside and sports, when you could probably actually keep it and reduce something else to be healthier. One thing I have in mind right now is that we often see the diet culture kind of encourages you to like eat a certain way. Of course, they mention you to work out, but not sure. I think different sort of sources give different percentage, but I would say like 80% nutrition, 20% exercise, and I focus so much on, eating unprocessed food and everything has to be clean and stuff. What is your opinion actually on what's happening in the diet culture, and maybe what are the issues there as well?
Well, actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because right when my book came out, there was a study that received quite a bit of press coverage that was, I think, out of Australia, which was trying to, and it was sort of covered with the message that no, you can't, you have, diet is important, and you can't, even if you exercise. But I then went, and how things get very simplified in the press. And so I got a copy of the study and I looked at it, and I also shared it with one of the researchers that I put in the book and getting case for. And he and I just noticed that, yes, there was a small impact from eating processed food. And if you didn't exercise and had a very bad diet, that puts you in a bad, and the study measured mortality, so the length of your life, whether you had with cardiovascular or just overall. But that if you exercise, your your mortality was much better regardless of your diet. There was a teeny difference if the worst quality diet, quote unquote, to the best quality, but it was vastly overshadowed by just the difference between exercising and not exercising. So based on that, I could kind of crunch the numbers, and it actually fit with what I was kind of thinking, which is I would say 20% is nutrition and diet and 80% is physical activity.
Okay. Would you say all calories are more or less equal? I mean, that is it in reality, it doesn't matter so much whether I eat a hamburger or a cauliflower.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm not going to throw out,
Yeah.
eat your vegetables. I love vegetables, and I wouldn't be slurping down a lot of sodas, although I will drink a soda from time to time or some sugary juice. But yeah, a calorie is a calorie is a calorie. And as long as you're meeting your basic nutritional needs, the certain balance of fat and protein and some carbohydrates, so it doesn't matter, simple or complex, and your basic vitamin and mineral needs, then you should be good. Enjoy your food.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna eat a hamburger tonight. Yeah.
Hamburger or yeah.
I kind of agree with all of this. I mean, the thing with medicine nutrition is like we are in an age that is not a exact science. Maybe in the future we have all the parameters to really identify the culprits for each illness. But yeah, I mean, like I like the approach of like giving the importance that it deserves to sports. And going back to the animal thing. You mentioned like humans, the pets that we have at home don't exercise as much as they need, right? So my question is, do you think is ethical to have pets in general the way we have them?
Oh, I love that question. I've been waiting for it. I would say no.
Okay.
And that, I'm sure people are going to hate me, but I have given it a lot of thought, and as I describe in the book, we have outdoor cats that we let out. We live in a city that has some homes, but still a city with some roads nearby. And one of our pets, our really lovely cat, was hit by a car a few years ago, and it was very, very sad for us. And we had the opportunity to rethink, should we keep the other kitty in? But we decided not to, because her quality of life, allowing her to move and be in nature and chase flies and yes, hunt mice and do what she wants outside is just so important to her. So I think that if you don't offer your pet a lot, and dogs are a little bit of a different case because you can't really walk a cat or anything like that. Maybe a dog, if you spend a lot of time outside, that's okay. But for a kitty, I think it's just there's just no comparison to their experience of they're having freedom, agency, and the ability to interact with nature. So no, I don't think it's ethical.
Yeah, I don't think it either.
Owners.
It depends on how. Yeah, I mean, like if you have a kitten and then you have the opportunity for it to be, roaming around and everything, then yes. But I think most of the things that we do with pets is for our own comfort, right? Maybe.
Definitely, very much so. I think, yeah, I in the book I have called them love slaves, and nobody really appreciates that little joke, but I do think they are there because we want to feel loved and we want to love something, and we don't really a lot of times think about the perspective of the pet. That's not to say I think there are real issues with, and as someone I interviewed for the book who had indoor cats commented to me, one of the issues is that we have a car, especially here in the United States, of a car-centered built environment. And if we worked on that a bit more, then we would have some more flexibility in terms of letting our pets, have a little more freedom and experience nature. So even though I do think it's unethical, I know that there are many people who do want to keep in their pets because they're kitties, or because it's not safe, and you do risk them having an accident or getting bitten by a wild animal or picking up some sort of disease.
Hmm. Yeah. Keeping the subject on animals, there's another part of your book which is quite interesting, where you talk about the possible correlation skew when using mice and rats in labs, in the sense that, like, when they're experimenting on mice, right? Those animals are not really exercising, right? So then the conclusions from the experiments might be totally skewed and inaccurate, right? Is that the conclusion that you're trying to come across, right?
That is, and it was not only my conclusion. That was actually a small group of scientists who made that observation. I think it was actually about 10 years ago. But so we have all of the laboratory rodents that we have, mice and rats, are habitually kept in these very small boxes. For mice, they are called shoebox cages because they were literally the size that you might have for a pair of shoes that you get at the store. It does not allow for many things, but including, it doesn't even allow enough space to have a proper running wheel, should they have a running wheel in there. They don't have space to live with other animals, and they don't have a space or materials to be able to create nests, which is something that they'd like to do. So when you have any kind of study on mice or rats who are kept in very similar conditions, you are by necessity dealing with animals that are have been kept in these conditions, and they are often obese, or at least not fit. So it's really impossible to understand what the impact of whatever the scientific protocol might be on their bodies, because those are not healthy bodies.
Yeah, true.
And so if you think about it that way, there's a lot of research that's been done really over the course of the 20th and 21st century that we now have to look at and say, well, what if those animals had been kept in the condition in which all animals really should be, with an opportunity to be as physically active as they would like.
Yeah, I think in your book you even put a parallelism, if the experiments were done on prisoners, that weren't exercising, right? And it would be the same, right? The conclusions would be unclear. So yeah, it makes sense. It was interesting. I have another question. That nowadays there are lots of trends on nutrition, right? I mean, if I look in my environment, everyone is doing a certain type of diet. Some people are doing intermittent fasting, or some people are doing a low carb diet. If you wanted them to coax them to give exercising a bigger weight in their lives, what would you say to them, right? How would you try to convince them?
How would I try and convince them to give exercise a bigger weight rather than following these diets? Well,
apart from reading your book.
I will. There are a couple of different things. I think men are also prone to this. I think women are especially. There's this whole, many people diet not so much for health, but for appearance. And so, one of the things that is really very tragic, I'm going to speak from my mother was probably between overweight and obese for most of her life. And she felt very ashamed about her body. She didn't take care of her body. She ended up having a lot of medical conditions, and she worried a lot about eating and how food, and she kind of had food was her enemy. And she didn't, when she cooked very badly because she was sort of this hate relationship. It was very miserable and it was very sad. And I think that there are a lot of women and also some men who have this type of relationship, which really torments them. So for me, one of the messages of the book that's very clear: you can be healthy at any weight. And one of the chapters in this scientist that I was talking about, Glenn Geiser, he analyzed, whether what's more important, your BMI, what BMI category you're in, or whether you're fit. And he found that in every BMI category, whether it was a normal weight or an overweight or an obese, the fit people were all dramatically healthier and had better longevity than the unfit people. And so the message that I have is, whatever your weight is, if you start exercising, you will be healthier. And not only that, it will, I think it helps people. And you kind of touched on this, talking a little bit, Marta, about mood after you exercise. But I think exercising, no matter, whatever your body is, it helps you feel good in your own body. It helps you feel energetic and attractive. So I guess, my first message would be just like throw that all out, focus on being healthy, whatever weight you are, and loving your body, whatever the way it is. If then from there in you maybe you lose weight a little bit or not, it doesn't really matter. So that would be kind of my first message. And the second one then would be just a focus on health. If you're dieting because you're concerned about obesity, it's the same thing. You can dramatically improve your health without, whether or not you lose that weight, by sort of focusing your attention on making sure you move enough every day and elevate your heart rate, and then do other kinds of movements throughout the day. So that would be my approach. I don't know.
Yeah.
Would they convince you?
Yeah.
Or if they have a dog, they can go for a walk. But a dog that is active dog and doesn't leave at home all the time.
True. And there's another trend that is very widespread now, that people are advocating for natural, unprocessed foods, right? So nothing that has additives or chemical substances. But I find I'm quite wary about that trend, because I think quite the opposite. Like if we are in wealthy countries, we have the kind of longevity that we have precisely maybe because of that, right? So what's your view on that? I mean, what's your...
So tell me what let me understand what you're anxious about before I answer that. What you're anxious about? What?
No, I mean, I'm just worried about the. Many people are really trying to avoid processed foods, right? Because they have additives and everything. And I'm just wondering, what's your view on that, right?
Well, that kind of, I actually, in a certain way, this book, Eat Like a Pig, Run Like a Horse, is part of a trilogy. It was sort of an accidental trilogy and I have another book that was sort of the bridge between this book, Eat Like a Pig, Run Like a Horse, and my first book, which is Combat Ready Kitchen: How the U.S. Military Shapes the Way You Eat. And the third book, which is going to come out next year, is called In Defense of Processed Food.
Yeah, that's why I asked.
You know about that. All right. So the reason, and so it has to do with my journey as a writer, and it's really started out in the food science area. I got very interested in industrial food, that led and in particular, packaged foods, and that led me to sort of discover the involvement of the U.S. military, which is very interested in making foods that can last for a long time, that can be transported easily, that are safe, and that are meet nutritional requirements. So they have been very involved in the food science in the US since really since the World War II. In doing that research, I really got to food scientist level, I think, in some of the food microbiology, and I started to really understand, a lot about some of the additives that we have. And while I know I think people feel very uncomfortable with the idea that rather than following, sort of traditional recipes, that science and technology are being used to create food. And why does that make them uncomfortable? Because they don't understand science and technology. So they're like, okay, there's this new, additives, and what it has this long chemical name. I think that's part of the reason. When you look but when I think about it from sort of a human history standpoint, we have been innovating in what we put in our mouths forever. I mean, we have reinvented cooking. Yes. We have figured out how to eat practically everything on the planet. I mean, even a little bit of rock, right? So I think the fact that we've now innovated in scientifically, I say, okay, maybe there are some of those things that may not be so healthy, but maybe it's just another sort of innovation. We don't know if there's, research that shows that there's a definite harmful impact on the body. Okay, well, let's take a look at that. And there have been, some additives that are found to be harmful, but I think there are a lot of them that are probably fine. And so I am less worried about that. I do think it's true that what they call ultra processed food, which is when everything kind of gets turned into, let's say, the component molecules and reassembled in a certain way, and it's very easy to digest. That can be, if you only eat that, that's probably not a good idea. Pure chips, although that was probably my youngest daughter's diet for a while, and she seems okay. But so no, I'm not really that as concerned. I do think, again, meet your basic nutritional requirements, and yes, eat a lot of vegetables. Those are definitely good for you. But yeah, if you want to have a package of chips, that's fine.
Yeah, vegetables. I'm trying to do that with my old daughter, but it's hard. she's very little and still doesn't like vegetables. So.
Well, I have found over time, if you do it, they will eventually do it themselves.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'm vegetarian, to be honest. But anyways.
One day she will. But that's an interesting point you mentioned about that. People usually don't go that deep into the food science, and they don't actually understand what they're eating. Therefore, it just sounds very scary, because I can admit as well, like when I see those long names, like on the labels of the food, it's just my first reaction is like, whoa, it should be just carrots, instead of like all the extra stuff. But on the other hand, it makes me think like, right now we can get food that is fresh all the time because of packaging, and also we don't have to drink wine all the time because we can drink water that is clean. So I think there's a lot of things that actually science brought that made us probably healthier. But I agree, if you eat chips all the time, maybe at some point you should add some apples there as well. Yeah, sorry, Pedro, I had something to say as well.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to add, this is not this book, but for my food science. Yes, there really been a number of new developments which are making processed foods even sort of using techniques that don't involve additives, which using things that are called cold processing techniques, which are able to preserve the foods and make them safe without actually adding anything. We're using pressure and, all sorts of other scientific techniques so that they can create a food that is able to last either with refrigeration or at room temperature, but with hardly anything else added to it. So it's just getting better in that area.
Okay.
That's really nice.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you can go. Now I'm gonna go next.
No, I was going to ask you, Anastacia, like whenever I speak to writers, I'm fascinated in the sense that you managed to complete a book, because I've tried failed attempts to do so, right? to write the novels and everything. Like, are you a compass writer or a plotter? How long does it take you to write a book?
Well, it depends on the book. I would say what's hard is being a nonfiction writer, because some people who write nonfiction from within their profession, but my nonfiction tends to be exploring something new that I'd like to know, which means that I have a lot of learning to do in the process. So what can take a really long time is doing the research and understanding the topic. I find the actual writing, once you get beyond the writer's blocky thing that happens, when you get a certain amount of pressure and your expectations have to be lowered, and that's a good thing in writing. So, but the research process and the understanding process can take a long time. And I remember sometimes writing at a point when I'd have to research like one sentence, do more research, next sentence. But I do find, on the other hand, when I'm doing like the personal pieces, the more narrative pieces, then I can write quite quickly.
I like the style of your writing, to be honest. I really enjoyed the book, as I said before. It was very entertaining.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I want to talk
would
before
you say that you are...
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, go.
No, I just want...
No, I just a very short...
I think you might have a delay.
Question. We have a delay. I'm really sorry. I was wondering if you're a natural born writer, or it actually took you a while to kind of find your voice. And how was that for you? Did you find it hard, or actually it came quite easily for you to write?
Well, this book became the easiest for me to write, and I kind of attribute it to the pandemic, because there was this I ended up writing it during the pandemic, and I had planned to do all these wonderful site visits and interviews with people, but they ended up being Zoom interviews. We were both in our homes in our sweatpants, and it's just like every sort of dropped away. It was like, I'm just a person in the world, and I'm just gonna tell whatever I have to tell. It felt very the sense of like difference between people or trying to project stuff sort of dropped away in that moment of crisis. And so this book came very easily, but at the same time, I also, now having a few of these experiences behind me, just kind of realized you just gotta go into it and don't think about it too much. I often listen to music when I'm writing a little bit, so that I'm just kind of not thinking too hard. And one more thing I wanted to add, because we didn't talk about, but it's in the book and also relates to the pandemic, is just the impact of physical activity on mental health.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I read that chapter, yeah. Especially how it affected one of your daughters, correct?
Yes. And it's just something I'm aware of in myself too, and I mentioned this, is that the mood elevation that comes from that daily run is just really important to me. And if I don't do that, I find myself, sometimes feeling a little down or depressed. And I know I've talked about others and people, and usually runners all have this kind of addiction to the endorphins that are created by the run, and they are very aware of that feeling of depression. But it's just so important for that aspect of health as well.
True. I remember the COVID times. I was with my daughter, and at some point she started slamming the walls, because she was like, she couldn't. Like, we were in a really dark small apartment, and I can relate. We didn't even have sunlight. So it was, I think the lockdown here in Spain lasted like 3 months or something. Like, imagine.
Yeah. No, it was a very hard time. Yeah, my daughter, who I described in the book, who got very depressed during the pandemic, now she's doing great. But that was a very scary moment, and she was, very, very sad, and not being able to go outside. And she had always been a very physically active person. I think that probably affected her a lot.
I remember the first, because I used to live in the UK when pandemic started, and I sort of could tell that it's gonna go bad there. So I came back to my family home for a bit, but I got sick, so nobody knew if that's COVID or not. So we had to stay indoors for 14 days and don't go outside because everybody was very scared from the neighbors. And we reached the point with my mother when we were like, we have stairs at home, let's run. And we just like running up and down the stairs because there was nothing better. And that's, I think, saved our mental health because otherwise it's 14 days indoors is actually insane. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
My youngest daughter, who's a gymnast, she taught me to do burpees where we jump, and I find those are really
yeah.
so on a day that I can't go outside, if I can just do this for a minute, and it's a huge workout. So yeah, finding a way to do that. I think even this is just a jump, but prisoners often do that too. You know, they become very dedicated to fitness and lifting weights and trying to find ways to stay fit when they're behind bars.
I actually watched recently on some sort of workshops, a marketing campaign, which I'm not a fan that it was a marketing campaign, but basically it was an interview with prisoners, I think, to the US, and they were talking to them about what would happen if they shortened their time outside by half, I think, like a few hours or like 1 hour, depending on how many hours they have a day. And most of them were just like super stressed by the idea. They were like, no way. Like, I need my time outside because it's the only time I can actually work out, see other people. And I don't know if there was any kind of data behind it, but it sounded like I can understand. But yeah. And our dogs and cats also need to move. So
Yeah.
it's all of us.
Yeah.
We're also wondering, I think we're going to combine sort of two questions here into one. Is there anything that you learned the hard way, like writing those books, or maybe from your experience, and also that I would like to share with the audience?
Learned the hard way. Oof.
It can mean anything. It doesn't have to be like any dramatic, situation.
Well, one thing is, it's not learning the hard way, but it was which is super nerve-wracking, is when you're writing about science, and particularly science where there's a lot of controversy. It makes you feel very uncomfortable, and I always go back, and then I do this thing where I try and sort of get. A lot of times it's not completely clear. There will be conflicting information, conflicting studies, and I will get very anxious trying to read and say, oh, is it okay for me to, make this statement? Do I feel comfortable enough, saying this when there's definitely, especially with nutrition, of course, which is, and we didn't even get to go the part where we trash nutrition and nutritional research in the in the interview, but there is so much out there that is sponsored or not very well considered, and there's a lot of territorial jockeying, I think, among academics, that it's a very fraught subject. And so I get like, when I went right before publication, I went and reassessed all the statements that I had made in the chapter that was about the fault is in our food, about why we shouldn't really be looking at food as being the source of our malaise.
Yeah, I think it's quite tricky what you said, that because in most cases there'll be always somebody that would feel sort of hurt by what you would write, even though that could be the truth as well. And unfortunately, we didn't have that much time to cover all the topics, because that would be super cool topic as well, but maybe next time. But we would like to also know, like, what's the future plan for you besides finishing your next book? Is there anything else exciting happening?
I'm considering that this set of books is closed, with the publication next year of the In Defense of Processed Food, which is actually more of an argument about why we should consider it as something that we can rely on in our cupboards, and that's from a food scientific, as I kind of discussed here, a feminist, an economic, and then a public health point of view. After that, I have another set of ideas that could be 3 books, which would be more memoir, and some of the crazy, fascinating things that have happened in my early life and continue to happen
Do you have a
Waiting for
publication
those as
release
well.
date for the next book? Sorry.
I'm
For the
sorry,
next-
say again?
For the next book that you are going to publish, is there any release date already or not yet?
Not yet, no.
Not yet. Okay. Okay.
But
Well,
that
we are
should
all
be at
waiting.
the end of the year. Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure to host you. We've enjoyed the conversation a lot. I've left a lot of questions not been asked because we don't have time. But hopefully, when you release your next book or whenever you want to be here a guest again, I mean, we will be able to continue this conversation. And I hope you have a great time. And I mean, again, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Pedro and Marta, and have a great evening.
Same.
Thank you. You have a great day too.
Thank you. Take care.
I set the pace
Bye.
when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror.